Well, Jerome Powell just had a meeting just a few days back and ended QT. Right now, we are having what's known, or that's likely to be coming soon, that's known as the QE or quantitative easing. We should try to understand why quantitative easing coming right now and why right now. We should also try to understand why we are seeing such behaviors from the Fed. We should try to understand QE and QT. These are terms that have been used by the Fed for a long time. And whenever you see QE, it's no good news that the economy is doing good. You should try to understand that that's the Fed indicating that the economy is slowing down. That's the indicator that shows that the economy is not in its best terms, or it's not really adjusting to its best level that way it should be. It shows a shrinking economy, or I forgot how to grow economy. It shows that a behavior that the economy is not in its best terms, or that something is kind of like fully off. We should try to understand that the Fed today, just to end that QT, or why it was doing QT in the first place, was to fight inflation. However, if the Fed is giving up on fighting inflation and is starting what they call quantitative easing, that means fighting for something. There's something that's shrinking that has to let it live. Fighting inflation to be fighting for something else. And that something else should be the rising unemployment. Unemployment has been seen rising, that almost has been about, I would say, 4.5% in simple terms. And this indicates one or two things in the first place. It indicates that there's less employment in the U.S. economy. There's less growth or in the job market. It indicates the slow behavior, or it indicates the lack of liquidity, the pressure to have liquidity in the economy. Just of the December 12th, well, the Fed started by buying T-bills for over $40 billion, and that's not some kind of small numbers. That shows the pressure that the Fed really needed liquidity. It needed to have that kind of a slogan or a way to have that kind of liquidity to be injected into the economy. It shows that the Fed understood that the U.S. economy is slowing, but to also try to understand where does this live inflation. The Fed hasn't yet achieved its goal of having the 2% inflation in the first place. Inflation, as it was last indicated, we don't have the result of November, and I don't think we'll ever have the result of November inflation numbers. But we should try to understand that the levels of inflation were around 3%. The first goals have the 2%. And the way they have been looking over there, they seem to be like forgetting about their goal or their initiative to be keeping the inflation at 2%, because they feel like that goal is going to be kind of unachievable. And these are real actual facts. You should try to understand why the Fed is going to be ending is ending QT for QE, because we all have to understand whenever the Fed is going to be launching QE, in simple terms, or quantitative easing, inflation is going to be high, just as it happened in 2021, 2022, when we saw prices were surging high as well. We saw watch prices going high, jewelries were going high, gold was surging high. Expect these assets to be going high, like Bitcoin, gold. Such assets are going to be rising high. But we should also try to understand why right now. Why is the Fed leaving QT for QE? We should also try to understand, the biggest question should be, right now, why is it right now? Why are they ending QT to QE? It indicates one or two things. The Fed is giving up on inflation. They are going to do their level best to inject money into the economy so that borrowers borrow money on lower costs, so that could hold business entrepreneurs and other institutes could borrow money so that they could see unemployment lowering down. Well, which is something kind of bizarre, because without productivity in the country, however much you inject money, it's going to end up as a consumer product. You should try to understand that US productivity today is kind of low. In fact, all the numbers you see in the GDP are being indicated by the US spending. If the government spends more, that numbers is accountable in the GDP growth. So the growth that you see in the US economy is not about productivity. Actually, the way you see how stocks are high today is not because of productivity. It's because of the AI venture that's taking place, and the hope that in the AI could be seen to be like the next thing. However, the next thing is not working right now. It's the next thing tomorrow, or in years to come, or 4 to 5 years. But what's happening right now? The stock market is doing all-time high, but wages are lagging. However, and not just lagging, they are disappearing, because also the wages we are talking about are getting low. Speaking of the unemployment that's rising, that means the Fed is seeing indicators of a slow growth, not just a slow growth, but a backlash. It's seeing a behavior of an economy that we should be indicating as something that is kind of a stagnant economy. A behavior that we should try to understand that such a kind of a form of an economy indicates recession vibes, okay? But the kind of fiat currency economy we are in today is an economy where we may not see an actual recession, but we might still feel that pain. The overspending that the US government is doing today, we should try to understand that it's not being addressed. The Feds tend to use QE and Chief T in simple terms. I feel like just to blind spot us, because we all know the biggest elephant in the room is the US government spending. And how the government is spending, that is not being talking about. Well, that's how politicians are. Because no politicians will speak about that overspending that the US government is doing today. And there's no one in his or her own hands is ready to stand up to speak about the US government, because if they do, well, their parties, let's say Republicans or Democrats, regardless of you're an independent, you're going to lose voters, because that means you're going to be causing things like the Doge did, because one of the main reasons why the Doge was created and at the end of the day was dropped out, because the Republicans saw that they're going to be losing their support for the rest of the voters. Do you understand why we are in such a situation, why we are seeing that Fed is starting QE? It's not because it's good news. Whenever you see money getting injected in the economy, just understand there's always consequences. Whenever I am speaking of consequences, I mean that whenever the Fed is printing money, your purchasing power is going to be lost. It's going to be degrading. That means if you're buying an apple of $1, where you might find it for 1.5 the next morning, because the more they print the money, the more inflationary it becomes. Just as I speak right now, the last data we had that was around, I think, either September, because October, November, the U.S. government was under a government shutdown when they were fighting with the Republicans and the Democrats. We should also try to understand why right now. The last data that we had of September had inflation reading at 3%. When it was reading at 3%, it meant one or two or three things. The 2% goal was way far. It was almost far by a percentage, or by a percentage in simple terms. We should try to understand, if they start right now with QE, that means inflation is going to be going higher. And if they continue doing the QE, and the job response is also degrading, because don't expect to be seeing employment to be growing anytime, because the government has started doing QE or doing quantitative easing. They're going to be printing money as well. It doesn't mean that jobs are going to be attained within just a minute. It doesn't work like that. In fact, Jerome Powell he said in the year of 2026 they're going to be doing one more actual cut. But we have to remember, Jerome Powell is stopping to, well, he'll be leaving office in the month of May, if I'm right. And likely Trump is going to be using his own candidate to be replacing Jerome Powell. We should try to understand that expect more cuttings is important, because Trump's ideology is to keep rates down and print more money to make the economy robust and doing good, which is kind of a bizarre behavior. We should try to understand. If you ask me in one or the other, this is kind of a behavior that many of us may not try to understand in one or the other. But QE, it doesn't seem like good news. Yeah, it's good news in the short term, but not in the long term. Without productivity, a country is not growing. Without productivity, a country is not showing actual growth. However, in the GDP growth, ever since they started counting the government spending has GDP growth, trust me, the economy is kind of a stimulus kind of economy in simple terms. Otherwise, thank you for watching. See you in the next one. Like and subscribe just for the daily news. Otherwise, thank you for watching.